Hello everyone, and welcome to another one of our videos. Please take a deep breath, relax, and enjoy.
What's the worst thing that ever happened to your genitals? When I was about 13, I was super horny and desperate to fap. I didn't have anything to use as lube, so I used a bit of spit. I ended up rubbing off most of the skin on the head of my penis, and didn't realize until I took a short rest because my arm was getting tired. I spent the next few days with toilet paper wrapped around my dick to contain the bleeding, and in extreme pain every time I took a step. Imagine the worst case of rug burn ever. But the worst part was, I never even finished. Had a cyst form near the opening of my vagina. Went from a small, somewhat uncomfortable bump to a painful lump the size of a large marble in a few days. Got it drained at the doctor's and the most foul, horrible smelling liquid came gushing out. Not me, but a kid at my old school was riding his bike and his zipper happened to be down. He crashed and the bike handles ripped his sack open and his balls came out. He went to the hospital and had them stitched back in. Man, it makes me cringe every time I think about it. I was about 15 to 16 years old. Teenage me was just sitting there minding my own business playing Call of Duty when I start to experience excruciating pain coming from my bag of marbles. I frantically whipped out my dick to find a huge tick half buried into my nutsack. I pulled and pulled on the motherfucker trying to get it out, it just wouldn't. I had to go get my dad to forcibly tug this monster from the pits of hell out of my balls. Dad never looked at me the same again. I was assaulted by a tree. I was probably only 4 or 5 at the time, so I don't exactly remember it so much as recall the sequence of events. So I wanted to go sledding down the hill in my backyard. I told my little sister, 1.5 years younger than me, to hold the sled while I aimed it. For some reason I needed to be on it to aim it, and the little dumbass let go. I hurtled down through the woods before smacking into a tree, legs spread, pelvis first. For some reason that I don't remember, they couldn't do an x-ray at the hospital. So some male doctor decided the best course of action would be to manually inspect my pelvis for fractures. He shoved his finger up my vagina, which I thought for years was my butt because it hurt so much and felt so unnatural, and felt around. The good news, no fractures. The bad news, I cried uncontrollably for about 3 hours because I was afraid I'd hurt the tree. This is a story my coworker wanted me to share for her. We are both hairstylists, so we often do our hair, nails, and waxing at home ourselves. My coworker had waxed a friend's bikini line earlier in the day, and still had her wax pot ready to go. She decided to go ahead and wax her own bikini line. She gets everything set up, spreads the wax and gets the strip in position. She takes a deep breath and pulls. Obviously, you expect this to hurt like a bitch, but it was 10 times worse than she remembered. She gets a mirror and checks out the situation, and there is blood everywhere. The strip was positioned in such a way that when she pulled, it tore her labia, right along the fold. She ended up waiting until the next day to see a doctor, which was too late for stitches. Now she has an awesome scar on her cooter. You know how you can spray Axe body spray into a lighter and it makes a torch? Well, if you spray Axe body spray all over your hand and then hold a lighter to it, your hand will be covered in blue flame for about 10 seconds with no burn, then go out. I thought it would be cool to have a flaming dick sword. 12 years later, I can still feel the burn. Don't ever light your dick on fire on purpose. It won't be as cool as it seems like it would. When I was like 9 years old I was playing in the woods with my friend, chopping plants and generally covering ourselves with the greenery which included a healthy dose of poison ivy. I urinate. Fast forward to the next day to school where I feel intense itching in my very fashionable sweatpants. Upon examination, I discover that the area of my foreskin had swollen to about the size of a tennis ball. Doctor was seen, steroids were given, all was normal again. Sometimes it is best to wash your hands before you take a piss. I wanted to trim my bald hairs, but using scissors took too long and using shaving cream and a razor would just make it itchy when the hair starts growing back. So instead I had the great idea to trim my saggy, wrinkly ball sack with hair clippers. Predictably my scrot got caught in the teeth and mangled quite painfully. Thankfully it wasn't too serious and I never had to tell anybody. Except the entire internet. When I was but a young lassie I was sitting on a countertop in the kitchen watching my mom cook. She stepped to the other side of the kitchen to cut up some vegetables or something, and I decided to follow her. Now the cabinet door directly below me was open, and rather check to make the coast was clear, I freaking leapt down, straddling the angled cabinet door. I'm pretty sure I passed out because my mom said I was bleeding profusely and we rode to the hospital in an ambulance, which I do not recall. The damage I had caused required surgery, and now my lady parts have character. It's not obvious to others, but I can still see the damage my overzealous 4-year-old self caused. Peeing with stitches in my hoo-ha is not a pain I will ever forget. I'm a type 1 diabetic and have to do regular injections. One day I did one in my leg. As I was about to remove the needle, I felt like I was going to sneeze. Thinking how bad it would be if I kept the needle inside, I took it out just as I sneezed. My arm shook and the needle slashed the side of my penis. Blood. Blood everywhere. Got a new kitten who sleeps on the bed. I sleep naked. Got a boner in the middle of the night. Cat decided to see how many licks it would take to get the center of the lollipop. I wake up screaming with the catch latched onto my wiener head. I was at the gym. It was shoulder day. I was doing lateral raises with 20 pounds dumbbells in each hand. Each contractile movement begins and ends with the weights held together immediately in front of the genital area. Imagine the position of a bent-over, double-fisted jerk-off. At the end of my final set, rather than slowly returning the weights to the starting position as proper form would suggest, I had pushed through failure and let the weights drop at a faster rate than expected. The weights then hit together. Very hard. And seeing that I forgot to wear compression shorts that day, the motion of the movement allowed the momentum of my body to swing my dick forward just far enough to where the tip of my wanker was in the prime position to be sandwiched by the two falling weights. Smack. Dick tip sandwich with dumbbells as the bread. Imagine dropping a dumbbell right onto the tip, or letting Paul Bunyan pinch your schlong. Hurts like hell. I dropped the weights, ran to the bathroom, examined my immediately bruised pecker, and promptly shed a few tears at the vision of my traumatically injured penis. Shudders. Testicular torsion. Basically, your nut can get tangled up in its own wires. It feels like it got tangled up in razor wire. If it isn't fixed fast, you can lose the involved nut. I happened to be on a ship that didn't have the facilities to do the surgery necessary to repair it, so the doc had to attempt to untwist it manually. Yeah. We're talking full 360 rotation through razor wire here. For reference, 20% of males have the defect that allows for this to happen. It can happen for almost no reason. It happened to me while I was climbing up a ladder. If it does happen, it'll probably happen before age 18, but I was older and one of the other guys I talked to that had this happen was even older than I was. Basically, you should live in fear forever. Well, I almost cut my labia off. When I was in the early stages of puberty, I entered an exploration phase. I was fascinated by my vagina, and would often poke and prod and pull for upwards of an hour at a time. My constant attention to myself led to worry. Was my labia normal? It is supposed to be so big? Is it supposed to stretch? I had never seen a woman's labia before, and my parents were not very helpful when it came to educating me about my body. They did hand me a book, but it was geared more toward all the new hair I was getting, the fat blobs that were quickly growing on my chest, and my impending period blood. I convinced myself that my perfectly normal labia was in fact too big and too stretchy. The only logical thing to do was to correct it. So, I grabbed a pair of fabric scissors and headed to the bathroom. I stretched out my labia as far as it would, and slowly directed the scissors towards my flesh. The cool of the metal was surprising, and I was repulsed by the feeling. I decided then that I would live with my abnormal vagina and just never let anyone see it. Riding a bike when I somehow ran into a mailbox. My piece got caught between the frame and post. Felt like somebody made tiny paper cuts throughout my urethra and then inserted a funnel with holes pouring jalapeno juice inside. The head of my warrior turned into a purple blackish color for a week or more. Worst thing ever, but it's all good now. At the ripe old age of 21. I moved to a new town into a house with 12 other people I had never met before. I had begun to make friends with one of my new roommates, Crystal. One night we decided it was time to dye each other's hair. We made plans to bike down to the local drugstore. She hopped on her bike, then gestured towards a large men's road bike leaning against the fence. Being 5 feet tall and the bike or seat being quite high, I figured, hey, why don't I just take a running start at it? After a quick sprint, I managed to launch myself into the air and land relatively gracefully onto the bike seat. Then came trouble. Amidst my short-legged failed efforts to push the pedals all the way around in circles, I lost momentum and thus began what shall be remembered as the swift jerking of handlebar. Back and forth I weebled during this slowing down, and yet still I managed to collide with the neighbor's wooden fence with great force. A force powerful enough to jolt one's vagina forth from a bike seat, and lo, a great smashing was given by it onto the dreaded crossbar. Curses were unleashed, and my hands, oh, how they cupped in attempts to console. All I could do was pretend everything was okay. I even walked to the store after that, smooshing the now loosened labia betwixt my upper thighs. That night I wore a panty liner to bed and thought nothing of it. Sitting in class the following morning, I squirmed and shifted in utter discomfort until I was gently encouraged by classmates to dismiss myself and report to the walk-in clinic. "Oh dear. The resident doctor begun, you really should have had this taken care of yesterday," and continued to explain how she would need to consult the hospital gynecologist via telephone before proceeding. Upon her return, she detailed how she would have to slowly insert a needle for freezing into my left labia and then remove/cut off any dead skin remaining. From there, she would apply 6 stitches to close the fleshy, exploded impact wound that had festered for 24 hours already. And do all of that she did. After a few weeks, vaginas heal super fast apparently. I felt recovered enough to test out the function levels of my nerve endings in that region. I was quite worried due to the fact that I had at that point never experienced an orgasm, and there was a chance now that I never would. My roommates took me to the sex shop and bought me my first vibrator. I locked myself in my bedroom and with the support of my likely listening roommates from the other side of the wall, took myself to home base. Success. 7 years later, everything is still fully operational. I just hang a little lower on the left.
Congratulations, you've made it to the end. We want to thank you again for giving us a few minutes of your time, and we wish you have a great rest of your day, night, or whenever you're watching this. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to subscribe. It really does help us a lot. That's it from me. Roll the outro.